idea was that if you have mindfulness on this side, and then you have compassion on this side, the idea where I see it is that it's like a bridge. Equanimity is a bridge from mindfulness to compassion. So it's like a little bit of a deeper layer towards understanding yourself, but then also being able to relate to the world with that kind of more compassionate or softer way of being.
You're listening to the Wisdom for Wellbeing Podcast, the show that blends science and heart to bring you evidence-based tips and tricks for cultivating a healthy, wealthy, and meaningful life. Now, here's your host, therapist, yogi, and fellow full life balancer, Dr. Caitlin Harkis.
Well, hey there, Wisdom for Wellbeing listeners. I am so excited to be with you today and to be practicing feeling balanced as we talk with the equanimity enthusiast, Dr. Joey Weber. So Dr. Joey is an expert on equanimity particular. So this is a way of relating to the world where we notice our judgments, where we engage with compassion. And he's actually written a book called Why Mindfulness is Not Enough: Unlocking Compassion with Equanimity. And this is essentially an overview of the research he's done, including case studies and guided meditations that support you to integrate equanimity into your life in a really practical way. You'll notice in today's episode, he really highlights the practice of equanimity. And I think it is an incredible practice and construct in terms of how we relate to the world. You know, when we see people who are really grounded in their reactions and the way they interact with the world, I think there's a really connecting component to that. And I think that you will take a lot from engaging in the practices that Dr. Joey offers. You will get to hear all about me drinking my morning cup of coffee. So without further ado, let me introduce you to Dr. Joey now. Dr. Joey Weber, welcome to Wisdom for Wellbeing. I am delighted to have you here with me and for the conversation to unfold today, Australian time, and this evening in the UK.
I'm delighted to be here. Thanks. Yeah, it's we were just commenting, weren't we, that it's really nice. This is the beauty of social media, to get to interact with time zones and people who you wouldn't normally interact with. So yeah, it's 10 o'clock for me and early morning for you, but the wisdom's still the same, right?
Exactly. And this is what is so exciting and so connecting, is that we can use social media and these I guess social connection opportunities to really move into a sense of not only connection, but I think of shared knowledge and wisdom. And I'm so excited to hear some of the wisdom that you'll be sharing with us at whatever time people are listening to this episode. But first, Joe, would you mind just sharing with us a little bit about who you are and the amazing work that you're doing?
All right, yeah. So my name's Joey, as you know. I'm a lecturer in health and social care at a university in northwest England. And I have recently completed a PhD in mindfulness and equanimity. And so I think the main reason that we're talking is because recently I wrote my PhD into a down-to-earth book, because, you know, my passion now is all about spreading the equanimity message and the research that I found, because I think it has useful and practical applications for everyday people like me and you.
Yes, and the title of your book is quite catchy. Would you mind just sharing that?
Yeah, so it's Why Mindfulness is Not Enough: Unlocking Compassion with Equanimity. So it has to be a little bit eye-catching. That was the idea, because obviously we've had a huge explosion of mindfulness in the Western world, and it's seeping into majority of healthcare sectors, judicial systems, hospitals and education, and we have some work in Parliament in the UK. So it's been commonly accepted and taken on, which is wonderful. And I guess the work on equanimity is not to discredit mindfulness in any way, but it's also to position it clearly as a separate entity, and also to open up a conversation of whether it is truly enough if we want to have a little bit more self-awareness and develop compassion, extend the parameters of our compassion, and also just bring that kind of wisdom element to the process. So yeah, that's the kind of the title of it, and I have this tagline that I've been saying a lot recently, and it's I aim to bring equanimity down from the mystical and put it into the lap of the practical. and that's basically because equanimity is kind of an abstract construct for many, and it was for me, and it still is. But the idea is to kind of really hone in on it and understand what it actually means, and provide like a clinical definition so it can be useful in research.
Okay, well, let's start there. There's a lot there. This is going to be so interesting to unpack and explore. So what is the clinical definition then?
Well, the definitions that I've created, they're like informed from Buddhism, as kind of mindfulness is informed by Buddhism, but I've attempted to make it secular. So you don't need to be a Buddhist or, have a traditional religious affiliation with the construct. Although I do understand that it's probably spoken about in most philosophical traditions and contemplative traditions. I guess this is a collection of knowledge that's been informed by Buddhism, but is very much part of the popular mindfulness movement. So the clinical definitions that I've created, there's two. It's two-facing. The first one's an inner equanimity. So an equanimity that we cultivate and establish by honing our self-awareness. And then the second one is an outer one, how we then express that onto others and how we work with people. That may be difficult, or just people we don't know, etc. So the first one, and the inner equanimity, it's a non-reactivity towards your discrimination faculties. Discrimination faculties is basically likes, dislike, neutralities. So it's the idea that we're always categorizing into like, dislike, neutrality, and the whole world in which we interact with is likely to be one of those three categories. So it's a non-reactivity towards those, with passion for self and others. So the idea is we're doing that with a purpose. So it kind of binds what we're doing with compassion. So in that, it's providing a wisdom, providing like a contextual human wisdom to your own kind of self-awareness. So who you are, why you're categorized, and then how we behave is bound by compassion.
There are so many layers to this, and we haven't even got into the second definition yet. So I guess there's a couple bits I'd be really keen to grab out of there. You mentioned, practicing with compassion. And compassion's come up a few times as you've described equanimity, and that's a really important part of this, and part of, I'm gathering, this practical application as well. How do we integrate that, or should we leave it until after we get to the second definition? What do you think? Does it come up again?
Yeah, it comes up again. It's very much present in the second definition. So if you think that the first one's about self and your own mind and your own categorization, then the second definition is around a reactivity towards others with a certain patience towards their own discrimination faculties. So you can behave yourself and others. So it's a recognition that what's going on for us is what's going on for them. And so with that kind of element of compassion, it's a kind of a wisdom element to that. It's always hard when you go into definitions, because there's so much like work around the definitions. As a pure like drop in the ocean, it's there's this non-reactivity element. There's this awareness of your own categorizations, And then there's with the idea of behaving with compassion for yourself and others. So it happens in it, and then we express it out.
Okay, let's start with the non-reactivity then and work through. So what is non-reactivity?
So a non-reactivity would be that you are able to observe and kind of monitor your projections onto experience or phenomena. So you're able to observe and you're fully aware and present with the element of realization that you. But of course, we then don't react automatically to that.
Okay.
So normally, for example, I didn't like you for whatever reason, then I would be behaving to you in a certain way.
Mm-hmm.
With equanimity, I would recognize that I have a dislike there, and that it's because of some form of context. It's probably not fully understood, and there's differences in upbringings, etc. So I just kind of allow that to be there, but recognize that it's not necessarily a true depiction of the relationship or the interaction. So then I move to the compassion bit, and I'm like, okay, well, I'm still gonna you warmly and hope you're well.
Yeah. So would this be a little bit of an overlap with the mindfulness practice then, that actually noticing, the thoughts, the aversions, the feelings that are coming up in a given moment?
Yeah, exactly. It's definitely overlaps mindfulness. I guess when you think of mindfulness, it's the common things we think about are attention, awareness, non-judgment, open curiosity, perhaps. And so that's there, but I guess there's no mention of discrimination faculties. So it's just the fact that the mere fact that we have likes, dislikes, and neutralities towards what is ever present, and work with that. And I've commonly said this before, but like non-judgment,
Mm-hmm.
kind of a term that's sometimes complicated. We are judgmental. Sometimes I think non-judgment can be like we are just shutting off from the judgment. So we're not paying any attention to the judgment in a bit to be non-judgmental.
Yeah.
But with equanimity, you're kind of turning towards your judgment. You're recognizing that your judgment's there, but then you dissipate. It's a very subtle difference, but I think therapeutically quite profound.
Very profound, and profound because then it's acknowledging that this is part of the human experience, that we have these judgments, that we categorize. And if we can perhaps expect that those things are going to be coming up for us, then I wonder if we can, number one, more compassionately relate to ourselves when we might have harsh judgments that, might not fit in our scheme of who we want to be and how we would ideally like our mind to be operating. But then looking at others as well and recognizing that, they'll naturally be having those experiences and may not have the know-how to be able to react in a way that is perhaps more compassionate or more friendly, warm, however we want to term it.
Yeah, that's the that's the point there. It's the I guess the recognition that there is something beyond the fact that, we projected onto a situation that, is actually comes from a multitude of different causes and conditions and reasons why this is happening. So it's paying a little bit of respect, I guess, to also the unknownness of people, including ourselves, because we don't really perhaps fully know ourselves and conditioning upon us. So it's asking us just to pay a little bit of attention to that.
So a lot of self-knowledge could be unfolded in an equanimity practice then.
That's the idea, yeah. The idea was that if you have mindfulness on this side, and then you have compassion on this side, the idea where I see it is that it's like a bridge. Equanimity is a bridge from mindfulness to compassion. So it's like a little bit of a deeper layer towards understanding yourself, but then also being able to relate to the world with that kind of more compassionate or softer way of being.
This reminds me, there's an analogy about two birds' wings that you need, each bird wing to be sort of flapping, flying, however you put it.
Yeah.
So equanimity is kind of the wisdom perhaps of that bird in the middle.
Yeah, I guess so. I guess in the bird, you'd be on top of the bird and able to review both sides.
Guiding it.
Yeah, you'd be flying on it, and you're looking at everything. It's a perspective thing as well, isn't it, really?
Yeah.
So I think Thich Nhat Hanh described it as, being like on top of a mountain, and you're able to see all sides. So you're not just coming from one direction and believing that to be true, but you're actually suspending that, your non-reactivity towards that, so you can appreciate the wider context.
Yes, and I can see how the non-reactivity would be really helpful in terms of, how we engage in day-to-day activities, not necessarily responding really quickly because we're anxious or fearful or overwhelmed. And I can see how that would help in relationships as well. But would you mind maybe talking us through how an equanimity practice might enhance our own well-being and extend out to our relationship with others?
So yeah, I guess it's like mindfulness in that there's a lot of knowledge about it and written knowledge, or it's in lots of books, etc. There's a kind of a knowingness of what it is, but then also there's a guidance to practice meditation to kind of increase the strength of the mindfulness that you have. So equanimity is the same. See, it is the same insofar as there's the knowingness, right? What is it now? Okay, it's to do with this categorization. But then also there's the direct equanimity meditations that can enable you to develop that on a bit of a deeper level. And these meditations that, I've written about them in the book, but they come from my early awareness of Buddhist practice, Tibetan Buddhist practice of practicing equanimity towards friends, enemies, and strangers. It's the same concept, you see, of like, dislike, neutrality. Of course, when we speak about that towards others, we have who we like here, we have who are neutral towards us, probably a bigger pile. And then there's potentially people who we have conflict with or we dislike for some other reason. So the idea is you're equalizing that same feeling towards, or attitude towards, each of the categories, the symbolic representation of others. And in doing so, you kind of, I guess, cultivate a more equanimous mindset. So it's a constant returning to the understanding, the knowledge, the wisdom element, and then the practice as well.
Could you perhaps talk us through how we might engage in a practice like that?
Well, there's some guided meditations that involve stabilizing the mind and then introducing someone. You kind of create someone who you like, and then you practice the same kind of wishes, similar to like loving kindness meditation, like that, where you're putting similar methods onto this person, as in like, I wish you to be happy, I wish you to be peace, etc. And then you do the same thing for someone that you don't know, perhaps someone who's served you food in the canteen or a petrol station. It's someone you just don't know, right? But you're just doing the exact same thing and creating the exact same depth of feeling. And then of course, then you bring in the last one, the difficult. And you do the same.
So it's formal meditation where we sit down and might kind of work through these stages of, wishing someone well and practicing this equanimity in our relationship towards what's coming up in terms of us. Engaging in this practice is one way of practicing, but there is this real practical element. Knowing isn't enough. It's actually a practice in terms of cultivating our equanimity muscle, if I'm getting this right.
Well, I guess it's like the gym, if you go and do tiny little repetitions in the gym, you build the muscle over time. So you can certainly do that by applying the wisdom. And I created like a 7-step method as well, which is like a kind of wisdom element. Right? Okay, how would you do this on a basis, day-to-day basis? When you've got no time to formally meditate, etc. How you kind of go through the same stages.
So
you do that.
The stages. How do we do that in our day-to-day? Like, can I do it while I'm having my coffee, or what are the practices that maybe a listener could quickly give a try when they finish off this podcast?
Maybe I'll send the stages as like an additional thing, because obviously there's seven of them in the quite
in depth.
Yes,
So
I guess, for
listeners, you
example,
can go to the show notes or you can grab Joey's book. There's options, but yeah, do you want to give an example? And that might be the place to start.
yeah, I mean, we can just, shoot with an example here of experiencing the cup of coffee, right, or tea that you've got right there. So to be equanimous with it, it'd follow the same kind of process. The first one is that you recognize that you probably like that. You've got a kind of bias towards that. And that then there's a recognition that's impacting the way you interact. And so you can become identified with the kind of part of your moment, if you like. And I guess to be equanimous with it, you're recognizing that there's also the tendency that we have to become over-attached or over-identified with it. For example, you want more and more of the coffee, and you more and more tea. And see what happens when the tea runs out, potentially, is you become a little bit frustrated or sad or move on to the next pleasurable thing. And so I guess life can become a constant kind of searching and desperate kind of pleasurable things and avoiding the things we don't want. So you treat everything kind of the same insofar as you're having this a little bit more objective relationship with allowing the pleasure to be there, but then not becoming over-identified and attached with that. So then when it ends, there's no kind of conflict or frustration within. And that's a very quick, that's like what stage 1 and 2, and then 5, 6, 7 quite close. But
that's really important. This we're kind of getting at that there's aversions, that things come up for us that are uncomfortable, but that attachment comes up as well. So understanding our attachments and our desire seeking is a real important part of this process. And this, to me, I can see, a host of applications for, how we might use this skill in our lives, because it's not just that we're experiencing uncomfortable things. It's that we might go seeking things that are pleasurable for the short-term gratification that may not serve us long-term in terms of what we really want to hold for our lives.
Yeah, and that's you see that it starts with likes, dislikes, neutralities. But I think once you do a bit of examination, you see that the likes become quite powerful. They become emotions, and we become over attached, and strong sense of what's right and wrong. We like that. Right? Then the dislikes obviously become a bit stronger, a negative emotion perhaps towards them, and then we become averse to them and maybe suppress, withdraw, or avoid. And some of that stuff is not necessarily healthy. So in the application, what you're recognizing is that the mind may start off with a small like, then it becomes a really rigid point of view. And I think what equanimity can particularly do well is in the realm of conflict and divisiveness and polarization, which is quite a large thing that's experienced in the world. And it's because everyone's so really strong with their likes and strong with their dislikes. So we have complete polarity here. And it's like, anyone who comes in this sphere, we like, and then we have them, anything there we don't. And so this is conflict, right? Yeah. With equanimity, we're lowering that. We can still have the likes and the dislikes, we will, but we're not necessarily swept off our feet by them so strongly. Mm-hmm. So it's like a mental protection towards yourself as well, I guess, because if a heavy emotion comes up or whatever, then we're kind of swept off our feet. But with equanimity, we're aware of it, acknowledge it, and eventually let it go.
I suppose this changes the way we interact with people, doesn't it? Because when you mention sort of these two camps that we experience so often in the world, and you kind of describe a rigidity to holding to one or the other, if we were able to see that other people also have these attachments and aversions, our capacity to interact with them and understand where they might be coming from and why things might be feeling so heightened, so strong for them, I think that would err with that compassion that you have mentioned numerous times, compassion being such a vital part of this process in terms of how we then relate, and the conversation might be different.
Yeah, exactly. That's the equanimity filtering outwards. And then, it's the that's why the second definition has this patience, like be patient, because recognizing that you're probably strongly identified with you like or you dislike or neutrality, and that's influencing the way you're behaving. So if I'm going to be compassionate, we can't force anyone else to be compassionate. At least I can. And we'll probably get that back, but
I guess if we don't, that's part of our practice too.
Exactly. Yeah, well, that's what they say, isn't it?
So with this, so you're bringing it from the mystical down to the practical. So, you mentioned that this was a practice, a philosophy that had been developed from Buddhist practice, but that you'd brought it into our secular framework. Just so we understand a little bit of the roots, is that where the practice, the people you like, people that are neutral, people that you dislike, is that where that practice comes from, similar to a compassion practice? Or what's kind of the history in terms of how this equanimity practice has been, now integrated into our secular practice?
So from a historical perspective, or the lens in which I've seen it and understand it is from a Tibetan Buddhist. When I was younger, I was kind of brought up for the first 8 years in a monastic community in England. There was kind of lay practitioners, but then there was monks and nuns and teachers, and it was a community of Mahayana Buddhism. And so I first, probably came into contact then, but became a bit more interested in teenage years. And then when I got the opportunity to do the PhD, thought, okay, well, mindfulness is massive at the moment. Looking at mindfulness research, etc. Potentially something a bit missing there that I think is really useful. I'll go back into the Tibetan Buddhism. And I also looked at other Buddhist traditions, the Zen and Theravada, etc., just to get an overview of like, okay, so if this was the equanimity, that's kind of suitable to what everyone's kind of speaking about. So it's from Buddhism. I'm sure, though, it's in Christianity and other religions, etc. I'm pretty sure there'll be different labels attached. I guess with all the different historical stuff, I like the expression that there's different ways up the mountain. There's not. So it's like I'm trying to. I guess with secular, you have to be appreciative of, informed from that, but also moving forward in this society, what works well for us, perhaps. And so that's the secular route. But yeah, the Mahayana traditional friends, enemies, strangers meditation is an equanimity one that is there. And there's also an equanimity one where you bring to mind someone that you know, and then you kind of analyze that actually this person's also traded places. Sometimes this person's turned into a stranger. Perhaps the stranger, there's been some conflict. At times have been a dislike figure or an enemy, and then perhaps they're back to a friend. So it's the idea that everyone plays that role because of the category put on. So there's different elements.
Incredibly interesting, both in terms of the categorization kind of not being a stable process, but also your history, Joey. That's a pretty interesting experience growing up and being in a monastic community. Is there anything, I guess, having had that experience, like in terms of how people related to each other in the community, was that quite a noticeable difference to the experience you might have in life outside the community with that degree of practiced equanimity? Did it feel like the relationships felt different, or that the interactions were less quick to get heated or, to go to extremes?
Probably not painting a good picture of this, but probably not. Because I think, I think there's this idea or stereotype that certain communities, etc., have it all figured out. But I guess what Buddhism's saying is that the human condition is complicated and it's tricky. And so anyone who claims, I'm a Buddhist, basically their job is to look inward and to look at themselves and their, who they are, and to towards others. That's kind of pretty general in most Buddhism. And so, in an ideal world, I guess you'd see all really harmonious relationships. And I'm sure there have been, and definitely seen. I've also equally seen, people in conflict, and they've come from this background. I guess it's all the relationship with the knowledge, with the text, with the ideas, their point of inception from it. Just because someone claims to be something doesn't mean that they're, free from that or equanimity. 'Cause I don't think equanimity is a short-term fix. It's a lifelong process. And, pure equanimity, true equanimity, I mean, it's almost asking a kind of impossible thing, really. A little bit like, suspend judgment and non-reactivity towards your own. It's like a little bit, it's a heavy thing to ask. And there's a lot of questions in the book that come up that I try to address. I kind of, when I've been teaching equanimity, the common questions that come up, and they're going to ask me to recite them now. Off my head, but there's a whole section there of how I think it. I would answer back to certain questions about it, because, it's complex.
I think that's incredibly interesting, because I don't know, I can't speak to the community that you were within, but I know within certain communities, I have a lot to do with yoga communities as well as some other frames, and there's a good vibes only mentality that I think is incredibly toxic and really disconnects from the human experience. And what you describe is that the actual point of this practice is to keep practicing, that equanimity isn't a stable state. I gather that you're describing it's this constant practice of, noticing what's going on in regards to those, categories that are coming up in the mind, the thoughts, relating compassionately, and engaging constantly in this practice, that we're not suddenly at a point where we're free from it and it is good vibes only. It's actually recognizing that these aversions and desires, attachments are going to be coming up, and we need to keep practicing constantly.
That's a really well put comment. It's true. It's kind of you touch on a potential like spiritual narcissism, perhaps. Sometimes I guess sometimes when we sign up to these belief systems or kind of good practices or things that kind of wow us, we can just assume we become instantly aligned. I guess sometimes there's the assumption that we've got it then, or something to be had. But no, it's just about reminding yourself, I think, that like mindfulness and everything, it's a moment to moment exploration, and you can be mindful one moment and you can be mindless the next. It's all about the next moment, right? So it's the same thing. So there's sometimes there's some friction with perhaps believing we're now this, or we've got this off, but recognizing that we may have understood that in that particular context, that particular moment, but then the moment's passed.
There's a beautiful lifelong journey to this. And for listeners who are resonating, they're curious, they're thinking, oh, equanimity, this is such a wise practice and an important practice. And, they might be noticing in their life where there are categories, where there's aversions, where there's attachment coming up. How can they work with you? How can they learn more, Joey?
Well, they can follow me on Instagram. I'm trying to do some posts and spread the message that way, social media. Dr. Joey Webber, or there's obviously the book. I am trying to plug that a little bit. There's not many Australians, actually. There's been quite a few Americans, Canadians, English, different European countries, but as far as I'm aware, I've not shipped that many books to Australia. So there's the book there. It's also an ebook and an Audible. I've recorded it on Audible.
I love Audible, so I'm a fan. Anyone who might be cooking dinner or laying down with sleeping children, it's perfect.
Exactly, yeah. And then I'm starting to offer courses and online courses, and there's online courses on equanimity that I'm in the process of finalizing. So they should be pretty much live by the time this goes live, I think.
Yes. So I will update, and let listeners know when those courses are available. What website should people be going to? Where should people be heading? Of course, I'll have this in the show notes, listeners, so don't feel like you need to write it down, but just so we can integrate it to memory, where are we heading to find you online, Joey?
It's www.equanimity.com. EQUANAME.com. But it's like it's you. It's about you. So it's Equanimity.
I love that. Equanimity. Yes. So listeners, to practice your equanimity, head to equanimity.com, find Joey on Instagram, and head to the show notes and you'll find lots of the details and links through there. Joey, thank you so much for your time and your wisdom today. I will be noticing, as I've set my coffee down because it's empty, some desire coming up and attachment pulling me to the next cup. So thank you for talking me through that process. And listeners, I'm sure will be noticing their reactions coming up as we conclude our episode today.
Okay, and thank you for hosting, and thanks for your intelligent comments and questions, because I think we got to a good place because of that feedback. So that's great.
Oh, it was fantastic to get to talk through something that I think is so important for our lives. And I'm going to picture like a little fairy or small person riding a bird when I think of it now. So I'll have to draw something.
So, how are you feeling? Curious about that 7-step method, I imagine, in terms of equanimity, but also perhaps noticing the ways that this might be applicable in your life. How could you practice equanimity and bring it into your day-to-day activities, interactions, and relationships? So again, you can head to Dr. Joey's website, Equanimity, EQUANAMEE, and I will be linking to it in the show notes, or at Dr. Joey Weber on Instagram. I will look forward to connecting with you soon. May you be well.
Thanks for joining us this week on the Wisdom for Wellbeing podcast. Please visit drcaitlin.com to connect, find show notes, other episodes, and to subscribe. While you're at it, if you find value in the show, we'd appreciate a rating, or perhaps simply tell a friend about the show. Wisdom for Wellbeing is not a substitute for professional, individualized mental health treatment. If you are in crisis, please contact 000, your local emergency number if you are outside of Australia, or attend your local hospital ED.